Hello, BookTube. As some of you may remember, I am part of a BookTube event in the month of May, maybe Midrash, along with Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse and Felicia at Little Prairie Library, in which we discuss every week just a tiny fraction of the various ways that religion intersects with the world of literature, and in Jason's case, also in the world of film. And you could do more than that: art, of course, and music, a bunch of other ways. And it's been wonderful. I've loved the discussions that it has sparked in its wake. One of the ways that you know that an event like this is hitting a good nerve is if people want to talk about it, they want to join in. But there's been one element that's been a little missing for me, considering my own upbringing with the faith and considering my own most often dealings with the faithful. And that element is rancor. It's argument. And I got a taste of that just yesterday when Lukash at Totally Pretentious made a video describing his take on the commonly held spectrum of faith, from religious believers in gods on one end to agnostics in the middle to atheists at the far end. And I thought that he didn't mean it to be rancorous. It was really, really good. And the discussion that grew up and is still going on in the comments field of that video was our little corner of BookTube at its very best. People having very strong opinions and voicing them very strongly without rancor, without bitterness, without personal attacks, because we're all going to be friends at the end of the day. That's the thing that we see on the BookTube side of BookTube, the books related side, is that we can talk about books until the cows come home in the most absolutist terms and are still friends when it's all over. And if we can do that about books, I feel certain we can do that about religion. But I don't actually have a bone to pick with Lukash's video. The only problem that I would have with his video is that I don't believe there is any such thing as agnostics. I think you should just remove that category. It doesn't make any sense to do. I think it's just mainly a gesture of rhetorical courtesy to religious believers. I think the true three-part division of that spectrum is the religious believers in gods, and then the two different kinds of atheism, either so-called weak or soft atheism, or hard atheism. Weak or soft atheism says I have not been presented with sufficient evidence to believe that gods are real, implying that if you do present enough evidence, the person will believe it. And hard atheist says, I have been presented with more than enough evidence to assert as a fact that gods are not real. And I think that's really the 3 points of the spectrum. But it's not Lukash that I want to pick a fight with anyway. And I don't want to pick a fight. I want to raise some of these issues. And I have a response video that I want to make, but not to Lukash's video, to another video that cropped up in my feed a little while ago. Just a bit of clarification before we go on. I promise not to drag this out at great length, but the reason why I'm saying gods in the plural, I tend to say gods in the plural when I have this discussion, there are two reasons. One is that for most of the 100,000 years of humankind's existence on Earth, and for probably much longer than that in other human and pre-human species of human, people have been polytheistic. Most humans in the world who have had a religious faith have had a religious faith in polytheism, in a pantheon of gods. Gods here being defined as an intangible, immortal, superpowered being to whom the people who acknowledge its existence direct some form of prayer or supplication. I'm not really here to split theological hairs. I think that any being that in your imagination fits that description is a god. Right? I'm not going to debate the finer points of a religion that you grew up in, but that doesn't have a breviary of its own. If you are directing worship or supplication to an invisible, intangible, superpowered being that's immortal, then you're worshiping that being. That being is a god. It's certainly not a human or anything like a human. It's certainly not anything in the natural world. So that if we use that as a definition, then not only my first reason that almost all humans who, just by number, who've believed in any religious faith have believed in a polytheism, true today, in the present world, but also true in the past. But also my second reason for using plural instead of singular is that I don't believe there are any religions that are monotheisms, most especially the three marquee monotheisms of the present day, the so-called Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. I don't think any one of them even remotely qualifies as a monotheism. In Islam, yes, you are told, you are taught, you recite many, many times that there is but one God, and that God is Allah. But who is Muhammad? If you're a believing, practicing Muslim, is Muhammad dead? Just dead, just plain dead. No, you clearly don't believe that. You believe that he's alive, that he's conscious somehow, somewhere, and that he's effective. That you can hope for his assistance, not just Allah's, and separate from Allah's. And that's to say nothing of anybody else. I mean, your religion also contains ancillary beings like jinn and whatnot. They aren't human. They can cause things to happen if you supplicate them in such a way. And Judaism, well, what about the prophets? Right? I mean, are they dead? I don't mean are they walking around today in Palestine. I mean, are they dead? Are they gone completely? Are they just gone? No, you don't believe that. You believe they're alive, that they maintain something analogous to the consciousness that they had when they were flesh and blood human beings, and that they can do things. You have religious ceremonies that you direct to them instead of to Jehovah. You leave the door open. You don't leave the door open on one particular ritual for Jehovah to walk in and burn all the furniture to a crisp. You leave it open for Elijah. So you think he's alive, and part of your religious ceremony is dedicated to him. And Christianity, good Lord, Christianity teems with deities. It's not just the big three, of course. Christianity has three gods at its pinnacle, just explicitly. and Christians make a great deal out of the triune nature of the mystery of the Trinity and whatnot, but nevertheless, it's three different personalities, three different things, three different kinds of prayer and channels of intercession. It's three gods. But even if you allow somehow that is not the case, that there is a Trinity and somehow it's only one God and not three gods, that still leaves you with whatever Mary the Virgin Mother is. You certainly think that she can intercede on your behalf and has superpowers and is immortal and intangible, can listen to you, can be in the room and hear your thoughts, and also an infinitude of angels and saints, all of whom are supernatural, all of whom are superpowered, all of whom are immortal, all of whom are intangible in some other dimension, and all of whom you regularly plead with for intercession in the real world, without even taking it, so to speak, upstairs to their boss. How are those not gods? It seems to me to be a silly bit of rhetorical hair-splitting to say otherwise. So that's another reason why I use the plural, is that I don't believe there are any monotheisms. I don't think it's in human nature to have actual monotheisms, but one way or another, that is the only bone that I would have to pick with Lukash's video, is that I don't think agnostic is even helpful as a category. I don't think it's anything, but there is a video that I want to pick a few bones with, and I thought I would do that today. It's a response video, but it's not a response video to a booktuber. It's just another YouTube channel that I watch. The YouTube's channel's name is PsychonautWispy. And it's a really good channel. Very entertaining stuff. Totally outside my wheelhouse. Totally outside, I would suspect, a lot of your wheelhouses. It's the guy who does the channel has had extensive experience with very serious psychotropic drugs. Very serious psychedelic experiences. Not just a little dabbling one weekend in college, but really, really through the looking glass kinds of experiences with this stuff, and has come back and talked about it, talked about what it's like, talked about what your immediate sensations will be, what your in the moment sensations will be, what your after effects will be, and that's all been just fascinating. Just a world that I knew nothing about, and to have an ambassador come from that world and talk about it knowledgeably has been wonderful in a lot of his videos. And in a lot of recent videos, he has also come into some land that he is converting slowly but surely, one permit, one city council meeting at a time, into a kind of land preserve on a minor basis. Utterly fascinating. Just love watching that kind of stuff. Watching what he can do with this little parcel of land. Just great stuff. And out of the blue, right here, I'm sure he doesn't know that BookTube exists. I'm sure he doesn't know that maybe Midrash exists. But out of the blue, he did a video called 5 Fundamental Problems with Atheism. And naturally, I zoomed right in. He in his video, he lays open the invitation to do a kind of split-screen video dialogue about these things. I would love to do that, but I bet I don't have the technical ability. And the door is still open. I would still love it if we could do that. But in the meantime, I thought I would answer his fundamental problems with atheism. And I'll leave a link to his video down below. Now, before I get into his my refutations or my comments on his comments, I'm going to leave a link to his video, but I have to issue a few warnings to you, my faithful Donoghue-gonauts. Okay? The plant people among you, when you look at his video, he's surrounded by gorgeous, exotic-looking plants. If you could pay attention to what he's saying, that would be great. The cat people among you, you're going to notice that for a chunk at the beginning of the video, there's a cat cleaning itself on his bed. If you could pay attention to what he's saying instead of to the cat, that would be great. The gays among you, the gays, I swear I can't do anything with you people. You're probably going to notice that PsychonautWispy is a cutie patootie. If you could pay attention to what he's saying, that would be great. God, you people, I can't take you anywhere. Anyway, now that I've got that out of the way, let's go through his fundamental problems with atheism, starting with the first one. And the reason why this video kind of interests me is because it's pretty clear that he says he's talked to religious people on these matters, but it's pretty clear that he is a very, very early stages beginner at doing any kind of systematic thought on this. And that makes his fundamental problems all the more interesting to talk about, because they are the first ones that will come to a lot of people's minds. And this is an intelligent, affable kid, perfectly, approachable in his style. So these are the kinds of things that you're going to hear a lot on this subject before you get into the deeper waters of philosophy or logic or whatever. So problem number one is atheism seeks to prove other religions wrong rather than to prove itself right. This is his claim. That it looks down on religions because religions aren't based on science, and that it builds a lot of claims of its own on the natural world, on science. And the first objection to this problem with atheism is, of course, atheism does not do any of those things. This is a classic straw man. This is just a misunderstanding of what atheism does. Referring back to my distinction between the two atheisms, we just talked about soft atheism. Then an atheist can believe anything in the world at all. The only thing that an atheist does not have is not making claims, in other words, and is not attacking anyone's belief system. All that a soft atheist is saying is, I don't believe there are any gods. I have never heard any proof, any demonstrations, anything that shores it up that would make me think that's even likely. That's all. That's all that soft atheism does. It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't make any claims, doesn't base anything on science. It just says, no, I don't believe. It's not sufficient for me to believe. But I wanted to stress here that even hard atheism doesn't make claims about the world. Atheism, hard atheism, the other kind that I mentioned, the kind that says not I don't have sufficient evidence to believe in God, but I have sufficient evidence to believe there are no gods. A hard atheist doesn't make any claims about the world. The claims about the world that are being alluded to here are made by science and logic, not religion or atheism. They aren't religious questions at all. Religion in the past, many religions have made claims about the natural world, and those claims have been 100% wrong. Every single time any such claim has been made, they've been wrong. So I'm not really sure. This objection seems to me to be just a misfire. This is just based on largely a misunderstanding of what atheism is. And so let's move on. We'll circle back to some of these things. His problem number two is that atheism ignores the subjectivity of the human experience, and says that we should only rely on science for our understanding of the world. Okay, before I get on to the sub-points that he makes there, I want to say, yes, of course, we should only rely on science for our understanding of the world. Not for our perception of the world, not for what it means to us, not for our aesthetics, but for our understanding of the world. Yes, you're absolutely right about that. There's only one way to understand the actual physical realities of the world, and that way is science. Right? I'm sure that PsychonautWispy would agree with that. I'm sure that he would. I'm sure that if he had a sudden burning sensation on the whole left side of his body and rushed to the hospital, he would want to talk to the person who understood the world of cardiac medicine based on science. He wouldn't want to talk to anyone who was basing their understanding of the world on anything else at that moment. When he eats food, when he grows food, when he analyzes the soil samples of his own property, he is relying on science. He's not relying on anything else. So, yeah, when it comes to understanding the world, we do rely on science completely, as well we should. There is no other avenue to understand how the world actually works. But he says also that this is a typical misunderstanding. It's common. He makes it, but lots of other people do too. He says, no scientific theory can be proven fully true. Science is changing all the time as it grows. Now, the first objection I want to make to that is, of course, that is a misunderstanding of the way the word theory is used in a scientific setting. And there's no good not adhering to that. There's no good acknowledging that. If you're misusing a word, that's nothing to build an argument on. In science, the theory is a fact. In science, the theory is about as proven as a thing can be. When not particularly PsychonautWispy, because he's too generous to treat it this way, but there are plenty of people, plenty of born-again Christians, for instance, who will say it's just a theory. How can you believe anything like that? It's just a theory. It could change tomorrow. But those people believe in germ theory. Whether they know it or not, they rely most of their, for instance, technology that they use on the theory of relativity. Newton's theories, etc. You know what I mean? Germ theory, cell theory, these things are called a theory because, facts don't, in the sense that are being alluded to here, really don't exist outside of math. But it's not that like anything's going to overturn cell theory or germ theory. And you do believe in those things. So I'm not, first of all, it's the first part here is just a misuse of terminology. That's all. A very easy thing to clear up. In science, that's what it means. In normal parlance, everyday conversation, a theory means a guess, a conjecture. Here, I've got a theory as to why I never see my neighbor before 6 in the afternoon. Okay, and that's perfectly fine. That is a perfectly good use of that word in normal everyday English. But if you're going to talk about it in scientific terms, it means something different, and you're not helping anything at all to just ignore that just because it happens to be the same word. But I want to get to something a little bit deeper here, because PsychonautWispy doesn't actually make his point here. This is all that he says for problem number 2, that science no scientific theory can be proven completely true. We have a heliocentric theory as well. I think it's completely true. We have a whole bunch of theories that have been proven completely true. They're not going to be overturned anytime soon. But he says that science is changing all the time as it goes, but he leaves unspoken his actual objection to this. And there can be only one such objection, which is the implication that religion doesn't change all the time, right? That's the only reason you would bring it up as a criticism, is to say, well, this thing is just based on theories and it changes all the time. The unspoken part being, whereas the thing I'm talking about, the thing I'm championing, doesn't change at all from time to time. And that isn't true. That isn't true by a long shot. First of all, of course, religions do change, right? The Neanderthals had religions. We don't know any of their gods. We don't know any of their rituals. We know the after effects of some of them. You bury a dead body with flowers in the grave, you must believe something about where that person is going, but we'll never know what that is. The first mud wattle settlements in the Nile and Sumer, those people had gods. We don't know what those gods are. Those gods are gone. That religion changed. Obviously it did. You can read just in the Bible, just in the Old Testament, you can read how Judaism changes over time. And let's talk about Christianity, shall we? Since PsychonautWispy identifies himself in this video as a Christian. But when he identifies himself as a Christian, he says, that I identify myself as a Christian, but, I'm not putting any obligations on you. It's not like I believe you're damned if you're not a Christian. He actually says that in this video. Well, okay, and I would probably think that most Christians don't believe that. But that is definitely an example of a religion changing, because Jesus did believe that. He did believe that if you didn't follow his precepts, if you weren't respectful to the least of his brethren in faith, then you depart from him into eternal fire, eternal damnation, eternal torment. And Christianity as a faith, it's not just Jesus, it's also Christianity as a faith believed that as a central tenet of the faith for 2,000 years. So the fact that you don't believe it now, a 20-something child of the world that grew up with Vatican II far in the distance, is a perfect example that you're not talking about a contrast here. Your religion changes too. I don't know PsychonautWispy at all. I've never had a conversation with him, but I'd be willing to bet that he, pick any example that you want. I'd be willing to bet that he doesn't think gay people should be summarily executed in public. I'd be willing to bet that he doesn't think slavery is okay. I'd be willing to bet that he doesn't think that the fast food workers who are working at McDonald's on Sunday should be murdered by the state. I'd be willing to bet he doesn't believe any of that. That's him changing. That's him and his faith adapting to the times. There were times not long ago, 200 years ago, when you would have been in serious trouble for not believing those things. And 500 years ago, you could have been killed by the church for having the opinions he has right now, calling himself a Christian. So the implication here that science is built on theories and is changing all the time, and then silently, but religion's not, couldn't be further from the truth. So if you're one of your objections to atheism is that it's not grounded on the bedrock of religion, then you need to learn more about your religion. That's all, because your religion is not grounded on bedrock either. But let's move on to problem number 3. Problem number 3 is there is a religious negativity bias. Atheism concentrates on bad things that religion has done instead of on good things that religion has done. And I would agree that some atheists do concentrate on that. Definitely. I would argue that some of those atheists are very justifiably motivated in feeling attacked by Christianity, because it's invariably born-again Christians or fundamentalist religious people, Islam or Judaism. It's invariably fundamentalist religion that will send a grade school kid to their crowded school with no inoculations against measles or rubella or smallpox or chickenpox or whatever. It's invariably fundamentalist religion that will send a kid that way. And that's a threat. That's an actual physical, real-world threat to the children of everyone else in that building. So it's understandable that some atheists would attack the negatives of Christianity. They would say, this is, or any religion, that you're justifying, you can be used for terrorists to justify blowing up buildings. You can be used as justification for sterilization or genital mutilation or a jihad or cross burning or whatever. It's understandable to me that some atheists would go on the offensive like that, because they look around them and they see that a self-professed atheist can't get elected to any elected office anywhere in the world, and they see the hollow lip service being done to the detriment of everyone who's not religious. I mean, religious people, for instance, use just a local example, religious people in America have been agitating in many, mostly Deep South locations, to pack their churches during a worldwide pandemic of an extremely communicable, virulent virus. All of those people want to pack their churches. Pastors have been arrested for doing it against civic ordinance. And those people they want to go to church, sing their hymns, press the flesh, talk to each other, and then go home and go to Home Depot and go to the garden center and go to the grocery store. All of them infecting other people. That is an actual physical threat to the non-believers in the community. But even so, I guess in a way I would understand how some atheists would get so touchy on the subject. I think a lot of hard atheists take things way too far. Way too far, and just sort of demonize anyone who has a religious faith. That is totally unhelpful. But even so, I want to point out that a religious negativity bias on the part of some atheists isn't a critique of atheism, and it certainly isn't a defense of Christianity or religion of any kind. This, like the first one, seems to me to just be a misfire. It's not a problem with anything. It's just that some people are jerks and some people aren't. And he actually says that in his video. So let's move on instead to problem number 4. Problem number 4 is the world is far too complex and intricate. How could it have come about without a creator? And at its heart, this will be very familiar to a lot of you, especially if you've given any thought to this matter or talked to any religious person. This is what's known as God of the Gaps. This is a classic example of saying, well, we see all this complexity and we don't understand it, so it must be the handiwork of a god or gods. That's the only way. And that doesn't follow, of course. You can look around in nature and see complexity growing everywhere without a god standing right there making it happen. But also, I wanted to stress here that again, there's a silent implication here, which is that the world is so complex and intricate. How could it have come about if not for a creator? Silently implies that we don't know how it came about without a creator, and we do. We do. What I would, if I did have a face-to-face conversation with PsychonautWispy, I would ask him, what part of the natural world do you think we don't understand? What part of the natural world do you think we look at it and say, no idea how that happened? There had to be a God that did it, because otherwise, how could it have come about? I'd love to know what he had in mind. He himself is right now personally engaged in creating complexity on a patch of land. Is he claiming to be a god? Is he claiming that God is standing right next to him while he does it? No, he knows exactly how it's done. He knows exactly how it happens. What other things? What complexity are you talking about here? Electromagnetic radiation? It's a very complex field of study. We understand exactly how it happens. We know planets that don't have it, planets that have a little, and planets that have a lot. We can measure it in every conceivable way. We can predict how it will respond under any circumstance. What other complexity? The mysteries of particulate sun matter in the air? We've understood that for centuries. Genetics? Gregor Mendel. Long before you were born, Gregor Mendel understood genetics. This kind of thing, this God of the gaps, not only does it try to squeeze God into the few remaining little bastions where humans don't have every single bit of knowledge imaginable. And that gets pretty embarrassing on its own, because you'll see religious apologists say, well, how did the first life, self-replicating molecules start? Don't know? Ha ha, gotcha. Then it must be this extremely elaborate, interventionist, human-minded God. And I happen to know which of the 80 million gods that humans have worshipped is the right one. And that God must be the answer because you don't have the answer. That's kind of embarrassing. 100 years ago, there were a whole swath of questions that we didn't have the answers to. We have those answers now. And you would have to ask a religious fundamentalist, if you could get a word in edgewise, do you want to take those answers back? Do you think those answers don't exist? Do you think they're wrong? No, you don't think any of those things. Not at all. 200 years ago, we had no idea how a combustion engine works. 200 years ago, we had no idea what was the actual cause of lightning, although even 200 years ago, we knew perfectly well how to stop it from doing damage. But we didn't know precisely what the cause of it was. Now we do. Are you claiming that knowledge is wrong? People who make this argument, and the PsychonautWispy is not saying this, but people who make this argument, I always want to say, well, okay, pick a phenomenon that exists today that we didn't understand 200 years ago. Well, we understand it now. 200 years ago, the person standing in your shoes would have said, the reason you don't understand this is because it's the mysterious workings of a creator with a capital C. We now know that was wrong. A simple progress of logical progression would tell you that the things that we now don't understand happened will fall into the same category. But even if they don't, what are you saying? That your God is not the God of Abraham and Isaac? That your God is not the creator of the universe, the be-all and the end-all, the word, the way, and the wonder? That instead your God is the God of the beginning of self-replicating RNA? It's not a very big God, is it? So when he says that, the God of the gaps objection here has been well demolished by many, many people. But he also goes on to say that he anticipates an objection on the part of atheists who would say, well, you saying that God is the creator of all this stuff, but wouldn't then God need a creator of his own? And PsychonautWispy says you don't really need to have something that created God. You just don't. It sort of solves its own problem. To which I say, says you. You're just declaring that God needs no creator. So what? Why do you say that? And why should it be believed? You're just making that up. You're creating an idea of a God and then saying, oh, and by the way, one of the things about this God is that he is forever. He doesn't need a creator. Okay, great. Well, anybody can do that. So that's not an argument either. That's you just claiming something. But then we get to problem number 5. I said this wouldn't be a long video, but I get going on these subjects. I'll try to wrap this up quick. Problem number 5, he said, human experiences are really subjective. People see things differently in a crisis. They hear gunshots, but no two people can agree on how many gunshots, etc. And again, there's a silent implication here. And one of his silent implications here is that since human perception of the world can be subjective, humans could be wrong when they don't perceive a God. That a God could be there and humans could just not perceive it. which could certainly be true, right? If there is a God who is completely eluding all methods of detection and who always has every single method of detection, no way to see that God, well, okay, all right, that's similar to saying that you have a beaver in your bathtub that is consciously eluding every method of anyone to detect it in any way. Okay, great. All right, you tell me that you've got a beaver in your bathtub and that it gives you great personal pleasure and a sense of grounded peace to believe that, fine. But you understand, it's a little bit thin. If you have to make all those allowances, if you say I've got a beaver in my bathtub but you can't see him, and you can't detect him in any way, not by any means that science has at its disposal, but he is there, and it's important to me that he be there. Okay, great. A rational viewpoint on that immediately starts to just humor the person. Okay, well, if that gives you pleasure, that's fine. There's no skin off my nose, it's no skin off my nose if you believe that. Just don't expect me to believe it. It is on its face silly. The point I'm trying to make is that in the example that PsychonautWispy gives of people hearing gunshots go off but not being able to agree on how many there are, there is still an answer to how many gunshots were fired, and that answer doesn't change with different people's perspectives. One person can say, I'm sure that 3 shots were fired. Another person can say, I'm sure that only 1 shot was fired. But if 4 bullets are pulled out of the wood, then we have an answer regardless of what they say. And this seems to, this example tries to smuggle in silently that kind of certainty when it comes to religion, and that isn't true. That is a false thing to do. That's like saying, well, humans perceive all sorts of things differently. You won't get the same answer twice from 2 different people to reality. And the reality that's being smuggled in here is a God. But the reality that I'm trying to talk about are the 4 bullets that are pried out of the wood. There is no analogy there to a God. It's not like somebody said, well, Osiris and Isis are real. And we know that for sure. We've verified that scientifically, factually, logically, visually. And so I guess we can extrapolate all the rest of these gods. No, there isn't a base here. The equivalent of those bullets pried out of the wood doesn't exist for religion. But anyway, he goes on. Our understanding of space and time is relative to where we are in space and time. No, no. He invokes Einstein, who's now, I guess, spinning in his grave. But no, our understanding of space and time does not alter depending on where we are in space and time. Our perception does. Our understanding stays the same, thanks to Einstein and a whole bunch of people who elaborated on general relativity. And general relativity is one of the most proven theories in all of science. It doesn't change. You can make predictions on the nature of space-time based on those calculations. But your perceptions will definitely change. But again, that doesn't change reality. And that's not an argument either. To say, well, from my perspective, it looks like the train is getting louder as it comes closer to me. To use a very simple, example from the Einsteinian world. From my perspective, the train sounds like it's getting louder as it gets closer to me, and then softer as it's going away. With the silent implication being what? That because I perceive it that way, that might be true? No. No, the train's not getting any louder or any softer. That is just your perception. That's all. There's a difference between the two. I'm not sure what PsychonautWispy is actually getting at, although I think the fact that he returns again, this is objection number 5 is the same as objection number 2. I think the fact that he comes back again to the idea of human perceptions is fairly predictable and a little bit charming, because he himself has mucked around with his own perceptions of time and reality and his personal space and all to a greater extent than all the rest of us have. He himself has actually explored in the world of psychedelic substances deep into the hinterlands where his perception of reality really does look completely warped. I'm hoping that he is smart enough to understand that the reality when he was having those experiences was not changing at all. It was just his perceptions that were. We can simulate those changes in a laboratory with a person on a table. We can simulate every one of those changes without any psychotropic drugs involved. If the person is being actively, if their brain is being manipulated, we can simulate every one of those experiences. And we can also simulate those experiences with psychedelic drugs to a person who is in a chair in a room surrounded by research assistants and project managers who aren't taking psychedelic drugs, and they will, and cameras who don't have any problem with perception one way or another. The reality doesn't change. It's just the person in the chair whose reality perception changes. But let's see. Yeah, he mentions that humans. I said I'd wrap this up. I will. He says that mentions that humans can't perceive ultraviolet light. They can't perceive radio waves or whatnot, and again implies that there might be other things that humans can't perceive. To which I would add two objections. One, radio waves, ultraviolet light, all that sort of stuff can be detected. It can be measured to the finest degree. Just because humans can't perceive it, it's still there, and we can still prove that it is. Whereas nothing like that exists in terms of religion. And also, religions can't be detected. Gods can't be detected. Famously, they can't be. That's why they're matters of faith. So I'm not really sure why the stress here on the fact that humans can't perceive some things with their paltry senses seems to imply that maybe God is one of the things they can't perceive. But keep in mind, countless religious people, religious humans, do think that they perceive God. So I'm not sure how far this gets you. And that those are fairly standard, vague kind of objections to the idea of atheism, or vague defenses of the idea of religious faith, that I just thought would be interesting to chat about. I'll leave a link to PsychonautWispy's video, although I will end on a positive note, because at one point in his video he says something with which I completely agree. It's the only thing in his video he says that I completely agree. He says, and I quote, "The only person who can give meaning to anything in your life is you." On that, we're in complete agreement. So that's a little victory from maybe Midrash. Thank you, BookTube.